Hi, this is Dr. Susiamianis again, coming to you with week 5. Today we're going to talk about, and for this week we're going to talk about the relationship between thinking and feeling, specifically how thinking and feeling impact each other. I think this might be, if not the most important week, certainly one of the most important and impactful weeks in terms of your own learning, but also in terms of your future life and professional development. There is probably no greater area that's necessary than this area we're going to be talking about this week, both in the academic readings and in the exercises and discussion, and that's the area of emotional intelligence. Specifically, how our own thoughts and our own awareness about how we are feeling, that is using our brain to come get in touch with our hearts and using our hearts to inform how we think and the judgments and decisions we make, and having a healthy conversation go between the two of those. I don't think there might be anything other skill more singly important than that in today's world. We are really in a world of virtual reality where our senses are being tugged at in an unprecedented way that our evolutionary mechanism is not really built to deal with. We have these millisecond flashed images coming at us in advertisements and video games, which in our old evolutionary brain are threats and things that need our attention. But what happens is that is a constant stimulus that is happening throughout the environment. Then what ends up happening is our brains continue to try to manage all that stimulation, organize it, decide where to put our attention, decide what we ought to be feeling. And we really haven't been giving those tools in schools. So I feel like this class is a service today to all of those out there, class and people who just happen to be watching this video, to help you, to really equip you to develop an emotional intelligence skills, an ability to use your mind and your awareness to begin to tease apart your feelings and understand how you interact with them, but also to use the wisdom of the heart to help inform the more clinical or controlling excesses of the brain. So here we are in week 5, going to try to develop a collaborative relationship between mind and heart. And so let's get started. I'll start with a kind of a summary of this week, plus a couple of the questions we have for the 370 class on emotion and motivation. Again, use this only as a guide. Some of you are still sending me your materials through the email. I tried that as a 1-week experiment. It didn't go so well because the Outlook email interface doesn't really work well for that. So I'm going back to just using Blackboard Learn. Please post all your stuff on Blackboard Learn. I will go ahead and make my comments and my grades there. Use this as a steady guide. Paste your materials into this document, the one I'm providing, and then copy and paste them over to the Blackboard Learn in the discussion board and also our question of the week. In the future, I'm going to be combining those two to limit the evaluations. We're really doing a lot of good hard work right up front here, but as we get more used to understanding the theoretical and practical questions around emotion and motivation, we're really going to start concentrating and focusing on turning that learning toward these major projects, one on motivation and another one on emotion. So what are we doing this week? We have this introductory video on how do feeling, that is affect, and thinking, that is cognition, impact each other. I did an Ask Dr. Zeus week 4 and 5 video and posted it yesterday. So if you haven't, take a look at that. I've also posted an attachment with the introduction to my dissertation, which is kind of like an emotional biography. It's going to be helpful in helping you to do the discussion board question for this week. So take the time to download that, watch that, and use it to equip you to do this week's work. So access and download the week 5 academic readings. Again, I do a summary in this session. So I ask you to be selective. There are a lot of readings. If you read them word for word, it would be very difficult to get through with them. So use some of the tricks I used on how to read and use an academic paper to get the most important elements out of that. read and engage Chapter 4 of Ekman on behaving emotionally. We're going to draw on that in this presentation, and then view the videos in Week 5 folder on bblearn. Especially, I think, the most interesting are the ones on neuromarketing, how they're trying to use the triggers of your mind to sell you stuff. And also Pieces of Mind, which shows how the intensity of emotional experiences matches up with the longevity of memory. It's quite fascinating. And then finally start forming groups of 4 or 5 in this class for group presentation and the Rosie Project and book club. I've gotten rid of the book clubs for Ekman, and instead I'm substituting a bonus book club, which you can use in these groups. And it is a delightful book. It's a fiction book. It's not heady at all, but it really brings all the things we're talking about to assess and to laugh about. This really arty, unpredictable kind of Zooey Deschanel character and this autistic professor who is trying to use these really strictly logical methods to find himself a wife. So it's hilarious. It's great. It really shows the ways in which people with very, very different emotional intelligences can come together in funny ways and actually help each other develop emotional intelligence. So it's a great read. And it's going to be worth up to 20 points depending on how much you engage it. So it could be the difference of an entire grade if that's what you were looking for. So here's the discussion question for this week, very simple. And I will provide my own example. I kind of already did this in the Ask Dr. Seuss week 4 and 5. So you can go back to that if it's not making sense. But basically, this is what I'm looking for. Look into your past for a persistent or challenging emotional pattern or dynamic. I find that especially family patterns and dynamics are good for this. This is what I call your motivating emotional challenge. My motivating emotional challenge when I grew up was my dad was really hard on me, evaluate me. Even if I got grades, I got all A's in middle school. The only person who did, and his father, this old off the boat Greek guy, said, "Why didn't you get all A pluses?" That'll give you an idea. And he would frequently call me stupid or try to put me down in certain kinds of ways. So I was really feeling like my emotional challenge was this notion that even if I did well, other people, especially people who are in my family life, could make very harsh emotional evaluations about me, about my work, and so forth. So that was my motivating emotional challenge. So then the second part of this is look into your present being for an encouraging, inspiring, or joy-oriented passion or interest. This is what I'll call your creative emotional incentive. This is the thesis. The other one's the antithesis. This is the thesis. So in my case, I really developed a yen for working together with others. I really enjoyed being in environments where people were mutually respected, where we were learning from each other, and I really even began to very much enjoy, and you can read this in my emotional bio in the introductory chapter to my dissertation that I've attached to the last email. And what I got was this notion that before I was struggling to prove myself, I had this sort of insecurity, and now I felt like I could kind of be myself. And by being myself, I can contribute to this larger intelligence in the group. And that each one of us could learn from each other. And this really, really started happening, but really came to fruition as a graduate student. We went to a conference and we're talking all the way back from this conference in a van. We traveled together. And we came up with this question: what does it mean to educate children to be valuable members of a valuable society? We each had a really different take on this. We ended up going through a year on this conversation, presenting at 2 conferences, and even publishing a book together with some other professors on this question. So it was very productive in terms of scholarship and professionally, but more importantly, personally and interpersonally, it really helped to show and to begin to bridge the gap between my person and another person, between my habits of being competitive with others, as, coming from the way I was raised in my family, people being tough on me, trying to push me, being competitive with me, and now this much more cooperative or collaborative fashion. So the third one here is use your creative incentive to recast and revision your motivating challenge. Is there a way to form a collaborative application or innovation between the two, that is between your motivating emotional challenge and your creative emotional incentive, to use the two, the push of the challenge and the pull of the passion, to repattern or heal or change an old dynamic. In my case, I did end up writing a dissertation about this, about developing an interpersonal notion of self-valuing based in equal relationships. And so, when you have difficulties from your childhood, we can oftentimes bemoan them, or we can recast them as an incentive or something that helps to push us or draw us out in developing something for ourselves and others that can be quite positive. So that's the whole point that here is it can be very small. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. It's just a discussion, right? I didn't put the actual word count in here, but let's call it 100, 200, 250 words, just these three things, and then offer it out there. Again, it should reflect your own life. Don't copy somebody else's, please. And again, if you really have another something that came up with you, and you just want to offer that, please go ahead and feel free to do that. Our question of the week: how do feelings, that is affect, and thinking, that is cognition, impact each other? Kind of goes through something I myself developed. Okay, there are elements of this I notice in the Ekman book. There are elements of this in the academic readings. But I just happened to develop this out of actual spiritual exercises and philosophical exercises that I kind of brought together from different traditions. So in many ways, this is my own development, but I noticed that there were certainly elements of it in the academic readings and in Ekman. I've just kind of put it together in something that I think will be really helpful for you. And I'm going to provide an example so you don't say, woof, what does this mean? This is so abstract. So I'm actually going to do one about criticizing people's body images as my example. I'll walk you through this step by step, and I'll use my own example. Please come up with your example, of course, something different. And again, please cite Ekman at least once and the academic readings at least once. You won't impress me if you do it more. I mean, if you are intending to be a graduate student and you really get into this, please do cite the material more, but you don't have to, okay? So the first thing I want you to do is identify a strong negative emotion you're experiencing. Focus on and describe the feeling. This is what the Ekman book calls, quote, attentively considering our emotional feelings. Now, the one that I want to pick, okay, because I have some pet peeves for sure. Last week I asked you to talk about pet peeves or things. For me, it is criticizing people who are fat. That is just straight out. I can't tell you how many times I've seen it, and especially when people who are husky or even overweight or even obese are out exercising and people are chuckling at them. I'm like, are you kidding me? This person is trying to do something about their health. They're really making an effort, and with that extra weight, a difficult effort to move on this, and you're going to start criticizing them and putting them down. I once had a frat boy, this is back in undergraduate, start yelling these profanities out and calling this person a fat chick or whatever. And this guy was husky. I mean, he was fat, okay? And I did take the opportunity to challenge him straight off and say, listen, you're fat. You could certainly use some exercise. I said, don't go around calling other people fat. Look at yourself, But it really got into sexism. It got the notion of the gender disparity on how we look at a person in terms of displaying their body and in terms of displaying their body image. Nonetheless, even though I had this commitment and do have this commitment, I come from a very athletic family. And there are a lot of messages placed in our athletic family about people who are fat as being lazy or as being unwilling to really take their health seriously. So my negative emotion was a tendency, even though I didn't act on it, and I certainly didn't insult people, but it still affected me. I'd look at a person who is hefty, right? And I think, unhealthy, unattractive, can't get it together, doesn't have a willpower, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say that. And of course, I was kind of making myself feel a little bit superior. Now, I didn't know this. I wasn't aware of this. But as I developed some of this philosophical and spiritual training, I said, Zeus, do you realize that's self-serving? You're really trying to use their misery or your judgment of them to elevate yourself. So that was the first step of awareness for me. So from number one for me, identifying the strong emotional feeling that I'm experiencing, it's an antipathy toward fat people or people who are husky or overweight. Okay? So now I'm like, okay, Zeus, you're using that person basically to make yourself feel good or to step on top of them in order to make yourself feel good. I said, there's something wrong about the way you're doing that. So let's delve into it a little bit more. The second step here is appraise or evaluate the feeling cognitively. That is what you're thinking. Is this an desirable or undesirable emotion? Why is it desirable or undesirable? Well, I decided it was an undesirable emotion. And the reason why it was an undesirable emotion for me was that I was basically stepping on their head to get a little bit of self-esteem. I was putting them down in order to put myself up. And I felt that there was something wrong in terms of my own character. If I couldn't actually stand on my own health without comparing myself to somebody, and I couldn't feel good about myself without putting someone else down, I felt there was something inherently wrong with the way that I was experiencing and processing that feeling. So I'm saying, okay, so here's what I learned to do. I learned to do an intervention with myself. Okay. And this is step number 3. Do a hard stop. Call yourself out, bring yourself up short without getting down on yourself or complicating this experiment with additional feelings of guilt, self-judgment, or self-anger. So I didn't beat myself up. I didn't say, Zeus, oh, stop doing that. That's awful. That's awful. You shouldn't do that. Just shut that feeling down and just spank yourself and move on. See, that doesn't work. That does not work. Because what it does is it shuts down recognition rather than say, where is this coming from? You know, we have this more inquiry-oriented mind. So instead of beating yourself up, do the opposite. Say to yourself, all right, stop it. Okay, you know that that's not helpful. You're going to stop yourself right there. We're going to take a pause, and we're going to take some time to do that, attentively considering that emotionally feeling. We're actually going to use our thoughts to really get down into our heart, okay, and see how this feeling is operating, seeing what it serves. Good idea. So that's what I did next. I said, okay, first of all, stop. And again, this fourth step here is to interrupt is optional. If you're really an impulsive person, you tend to fire off that angry email, you may need to add this additional step, which is to interrupt and not lash out at someone, scream at someone, send an angry email out. Most of you probably have managed your emotions enough where that's not going to be an issue, but just in case, we have that extra step in there. So here was the innovation that I discovered. I don't know where it came from. It kind of came out of the blue for me, but I found it to be immensely effective. And it's this one, number 5, reverse. Concentrate on flipping your identified negative emotion into the opposite emotion. We're trying here to use thought to reverse the state of the emotion. For instance, if you're irritated by a driver's seeming pushiness, someone that's driving next to you, focus on compassion by imagining the crowded, anxious life that he or she is living and how it manifested in that drive and them cutting you off and zooming in and out of traffic and so forth. So again, what you're doing is you are creating not just a reactive, a self-justifying emotion. Instead, you're starting to broaden and deepen and flip up, surprise your normal pattern. And you'd be surprised, it only actually took me a few weeks of this before I really began to call myself out and started to rewire my brain. When it came to people who were overweight, I began, one, to have compassion and thankfulness that they were helping me become more aware of my body, okay? And also, I was also becoming more thankful and compassionate about the difficulty of living in a society which overweight. I started asking myself the questions. I'll bet they get awful comments. I bet it's difficult to get in and out of, say, an airplane seat. And so I start thinking along these lines, and I start developing this sense of compassion rather than judgment about their situation. And it started getting me to think about everything from prayer to just when I'm working with people that are overweight, to be sensitive to that. To share some of the health tips, again, non-judgmentally and not with any kind of expectation, and to just be aware that it's difficult, that it's a difficult life. So that did a few things. It removed my self-righteousness and my getting my own value and worth out of stepping on them, okay? And it helped me develop a much better character, more compassionate character, and open character. Now when I meet a person who is overweight, I don't look at their weight. I look at them, because that rewiring of my brain that would have put that image and that judgment in front of my authentic engagement with them as people has now been removed. I can honestly say I don't have that reaction now because I've actually helped use my cognition, help train my emotional response. And the last, and this is one I just throw in, is to consolidate. Take the time to let the experience sink in and notice what happens on a body, mind, and heart level. Express gratitude to yourself and the other person, I guess I should probably put the other person. Okay, and I'll just hit save on that one. Always stimulates, yes. And again, practice this emotional alchemy of changing emotional lead into gold. What effect does this gratitude have? It has a way of consolidating your gains. So I just want to conclude this by saying there's something called judgment, all right? It is my experience that a negative judgment thought about a person, not simply a critical evaluation of an action. It's fine. I mean, we do that in theater. We do that when you're judging art on a wall. We're not criticizing the person. We're just helping them critique different parts of their art. Always stimulates a negative feeling about that person. I've found that to be the case. A negative thought stimulates a negative feeling. Conversely, a positive judgment or thought about a person seems to stimulate a positive feeling about that person. So experiment with this. See if you're right. You can disagree with me on this if you like. Also, negative feelings tend to inspire negative judgment. They work together again. The thinking and the feeling work together, and the positive feelings tend to inspire positive judgments. And again, if you're biased in a positive way towards someone and you're neglecting some of their weaknesses, that's not necessarily a good thing. I'm not just recommending pie in the sky here. Remember, critical evaluation is one of the 4 C's that we want to have here, as well as creative engagement, capability, and content understanding, as well as compassion. So do you find this to be so, like what I'm talking about here? If you agree or disagree, you can make that part of this discussion. And other than that, it's really just about asking me a question down here. Again, my background's in multicultural education shows that positive judgments and feelings about people from diverse backgrounds and perspectives lend themselves to feelings of affiliation, or what I call with, right? Connection, equality, and togetherness. While negative judgments and feelings toward people from diverse backgrounds and perspectives lead to a feeling of superiority or separation, apart, right? Domination, against, and one person putting themselves over the other, okay? So we don't want, part of this is not just individual, it's communal. It's finding a way for us to not just get along, but to really respect and learn from and engage and enjoy one another. So I do have another section of this. I will go ahead and pause it right now. We're already up to 23 minutes. Maybe I'll just blow through it very, very quickly. Because this is really the major part here. And let me stop the recording and really make it maybe a 5-minute review of the readings. Okay, I'll be switching and I'll come right back. Well, I've spent so much time talking about the assignment. I will just breeze through these readings quite quickly. I want to spend probably no more than 5 minutes on this, but this is chapter 4 on behaving emotionally in Ekman. The first few chapters really do help, the first few pages of this chapter really do help give you an idea about why we're doing this, okay? Why it's important to have emotions. Emotions help to in-tune us. Without them, we would be inhuman. That's what it's saying down here. Also, learning to be, becoming too over-controlled or too over-emotional gets in that dynamic we were talking about before, where we don't have enough heart, okay? But not being emotional or being too emotional and not using our thinking allows us to be impulsive and uncontrolled, and oftentimes quite abrasive with other people. So again, a lot of this is reinforcing what we've already seen. I won't go on too much here. I'm just sort of breezing through the different pages here. Now, here's one thing I wanted to disagree with. This is actually on page 55. Here's a statement that Ekman makes. Thoughts, on the other hand, you're talking about emotions will always be apparent in some way. We can try to stifle them, but subtly, our whole evolutionary structure is guaranteed or disposed to let emotions show for evolutionary reasons, so other people know, so other people can be warned, and so forth. Thoughts, on the other hand, says Ekman, up right on the top here, are totally private. No one knows if we are thinking about our mother, the show we're missing in television, or how to change our internet stock investment, unless emotions are mixed with these thoughts, as they often are. While there are no external signs that even tells people we are thinking, let alone what we are thinking, this is not the case with emotion. Now, that one is just a bad statement. Of course, there are ways in which generally we can tell what people are thinking, like I said, unless emotions are mixed with them. But we can tell that people are thinking simply. People ask me, what are you thinking all the time? Why? Because they can see that my eyes are glassed over a little bit, and then I'm running, that they can practically see the thoughts running through my head. I'm kind of staring off in space a little bit. That's not an expression of emotion. That's an expression of thinking. A lot of times we'll look here or up when we're thinking about something. That's a signal we're thinking. And it isn't connected with an emotion. So whenever you make these all statements out here, I very caution scholars not to use those all statements. Of course, we know when we're thinking many times. We have very definite signs. Looking up is a definite sign. The glassy eyes, we're kind of looking off into the distance, is a definite sign that we are thinking about other things. And that gets inconvenient when you're out on a date. People might not think you're interested in them. So, it's important too, for your well-being, for your dating life, among other things. So, again, I talked about the resisting the temptation of jumping to conclusions emotionally, because oftentimes that can have dramatic consequences. For some people, and this is an important point too. For some people, starting down here on the bottom of page 58, for some people an angry argument is enjoyable, and many people enjoy a good cry while seeing a sad movie, to name just two examples. On the other hand, amusement, a supposedly or presumably positive feeling, can be cruel, involving ridicule. So he's basically saying these emotions can't just be easily categorized. They have to be based in context, depending on where they're coming from and what they're being applied to. That's a good point. That's a good point. I'm just rolling by here now. A lot of this I already covered. Reevaluation in my exercise to you all. So I don't think it's really that important we go into it. That does point toward emotional intelligence, which is, people call EQ instead of IQ, but emotional intelligence. Most of this I have actually brought forward. Chapter 18 is emotion and cognition. This is Eysenck and from Keene. Again, I guess I want to do some challenging of this academic material, because much of cognitive psychology has tended to look at emotions and cognition in a computer analog. And the one thing that I will just say here is that computers do not make creative choices. Okay, they can simulate creative choices, but they don't. There's something about our affective life, our emotional report, that really sets us apart from, say, artificial intelligence. And the more people try to simulate emotions, the more convincingly it may look that way. But I've yet to see anything come close to the human being when it comes to actually producing and engaging emotions, especially thinking affecting emotions and emotions thinking affecting thinking. So, yikes, what did I say here? Emotions distort thinking. Oh yeah, right. There is a consistent bias, and it's not surprising that it's made by men. Because men say, I'm the intellect and you, woman, are the emotion, the uncontrollable emotion. What we are finding now throughout all these academic readings is that emotion and thinking, that is thinking and feeling, are absolutely necessary to one another. They could not live with one another. One is not higher than the other. They both, if they work well together, work well together. The thinking can help appraise emotion, right, and help develop emotion and see it. But the emotion can give thinking life, passion. Every invention ever made practically was made through an emotional insight, where intuition and so forth put all the pieces together, and then finally the analytical mind could work on it. Emotion and intuition is a far more complex and powerful system than simply the mind alone. So anytime you get, in academia is unfortunately very biased toward the mental world and not very skilled oftentimes in the emotional realm. But the fact is, recent research absolutely confirms that the emotion, that is the affective realm, and thinking, or the cognitive realm, absolutely need each other, okay? And And I think that's the real take home here. You see it in a lot of these different articles. I've underlined it again. And again, one doesn't come before the others. It used to be they always thought that the cognition would come before the emotion. Then there was a lot of research that says there's the emotion that happens, especially when it comes to our purchasing decisions. So again, look back at the neuromarketing, and then we rationalize it with our mind. So there are all kinds of phenomena which show that emotion comes first, and then the thinking comes later, and then some other times where thinking comes first and emotion comes later. But the main thing is to realize is that they have a relationship with each other. They're different but essentially equal. They both serve evolutionary and practical functions. And the best situation for you as a person, as a helping professor, a professional, or as a future professor or researcher in emotions is to understand this. Again, let me emphasize how rich this field actually is. If you have any interest in emotions and motivation, I can tell you right now it's going to explode in everything from marketing to classroom management to people dealing with all the changes that are happening in the world and psychologically adjusting to that. It all centers in many ways on emotional intelligence. So if you have any interest in this at all, it is a great career move, guaranteed. If you're a helping professional, nurse, social worker, whatever, your success is going to rest very much so on your ability to be emotionally intelligent. So I would recommend all of you to pursue this in your final projects, to pursue something that's personally interesting to you and that professionally can lead to greater development, to a job, to doing something you really enjoy doing. Okay, it's talking about emotional intelligence and one of the reasons why we do it. Individuals selectively construct their experiences of reality, and that the result of the process depends heavily on individuals' construction competencies, information processing abilities, okay? So it talked about emotional competencies here. That's part of our skills. That's part of what it means to be EQ, emotionally intelligent, right? I've already talked about this, but oftentimes still there's a tilt toward the cognitive, and certainly in history. Please read this. If you want to understand some of the gender dynamics around it, oh my gosh. Aristotle, I'm a philosopher, but Aristotle reviewed, thought of emotion as inferior, again, associated oftentimes with women, imposing silence on your senses, sensuality, all considered to be a distortion of the clear thinking. That turns out not to be true. As we know, especially in the 20th century, some of the worst decisions made that destroyed hundreds of millions of people had to do with a cold, calculating notion of eugenics and the superiority of certain races, and using rationalization to create massive killing, as if it were somehow good for society. So, if anything, I would say that rationalism has created, especially in the 20th century, untold destruction. And to think that it's just simply emotions and passions that do that is just simply not fair. Here are a couple of double stars here. Today, great emphasis is placed on the psychological importance of emotion, and it is generally accepted that emotions augment rather than interfere with other cognitive capacities. There it is in black and white, right there on your academic paper. Moreover, there's wide agreement that emotions are the primary sources of motivation. They arouse, sustain, and direct human actions. So there you have it again. Proof positive in this article that emotions play a central role in life quality and in decision making and so forth. Again, I'll read here. Humans are not in any practical sense predominantly rational beings, nor are they predominantly emotional beings. They're both. Thus, people's ability to adapt and cope in life and depend on the integrated functioning of emotional and rational capacities. Like I said in the previous video, a conversation between thinking and feeling. When that happens, you have the real chance for success. And here's the reason why. Reason without affect, that is reason without feeling, would be impotent. It would have no juice. However, right, affect without reason would be blind. It wouldn't make good judgments. It would just be bumping around. So there in a nutshell is the reason why we're doing this chapter today, studying Ekman, studying the question about how thinking and feeling relate to each other, because we're looking for an integrated approach going forward. I encourage you to look at the rest of this. This is a pretty good article. This also gets my conditional Zeus seal of approval. It's fairly straightforward. It goes through some of the myths that are out there. This is the one on emotional intelligence, chapter 33. So if you want to quote that one along with that other one, like the Mesquite article, which I liked from a couple of weeks ago, be my guest. Memory and emotion, I'm not going to really spend any time with. You guys can read through it. A lot of the videos will deal with memory and emotion, so you can look through in terms of the videos. But, I really do hope you get a lot out of this. Please do ask a question if you want to know something specific. I think I've given you a little bit of background about how to answer these questions and their importance. But please also just send a comment about how you feel like this is helping you. Or if there's something confusing I'm saying that you want a little bit more information about, just let me know. I'll be willing and able to help. All right, until next week, this is Dr. Zeus signing off.